My parents ignored me for years. Now they're begging me to save them after their golden child failed, and then I'll never forget the day my parents stopped seeing me. It wasn't some dramatic argument or explosive moment. It was gradual, like watching the paint peel off a wall. Slow, quiet, and ignored until there was nothing left but emptiness. It wasn't always this way. When I was little, life felt almost normal, or as normal as it could be in a small, quiet town like Ashwood, Ohio. My parents, Steve and Karen, had two sons. Me, Evan Carter, the oldest at 24 now, and Ryan, my younger brother who just turned 22. The difference was that Ryan was the miracle child, the son who could do no wrong, while I was the kid who existed somewhere in the background. But back then, I didn't know the difference. I didn't understand how my quiet nature and love for things like drawing and building little projects weren't enough to hold their attention. I didn't get why they focused all their energy, love, and resources on Ryan. I just knew that slowly, bit by bit, I was becoming invisible. Ryan was the kind of kid people gravitate toward. Even as a toddler, he had that magnetic charm that made strangers smile and adults chuckle when he said something funny. By the time he hit elementary school, he was already the star. Teachers loved him. Kids wanted to be his friend. And my parents, well, they worshipped him. I, on the other hand, was quieter. I liked to read, draw, and tinker with little projects in my room. I wasn't the type to light up a room the moment I walked in, and I certainly wasn't going to charm an audience with a toothy grin like Ryan. To Steve and Karen, I was fine, just fine. I think they thought I didn't need much attention because I wasn't demanding it. At first, the favoritism was subtle. I can remember Christmas mornings when I was 6 and Ryan was 4. We'd both tear into our gifts, but his pile always seemed just a little bigger. I figured maybe it was because he was younger, so they wanted to spoil him a bit more. But as the years passed, it became obvious. Ryan wasn't just their favorite, he was everything. Birthdays were one of the clearest signs. Every year for Ryan's birthday, our house turned into a carnival. Streamers hung from every wall, balloons floated across the living room, and kids ran wild while music blasted from the speakers. Steve would man the grill outside, flipping burgers like he was cooking for a royal feast. And the gifts? A new bike, a PlayStation, a basketball hoop. Nothing was too much for Ryan. Then there were my birthdays. A grocery store cake with sloppily written icing, maybe a card, and a mumbled "Happy Birthday, Evan" before my parents went back to talking about Ryan's soccer practice. I told myself it didn't matter. Birthdays weren't everything, right? But it still hurt. I'll never forget when I turned 12. I spent weeks begging my parents for an art set I'd seen in a store window downtown. Paints, brushes, everything. It was perfect. My mom said she'd think about it. Instead, I got a pack of pins from the dollar store. The same year, Ryan got a brand new mountain bike for his 10th birthday. He rode it up and down the street while I watched from the porch. The worst part wasn't even the gifts. It was the way my achievements never seemed to matter. I worked my butt off in middle school to get straight A's one year. I remember clutching my report card like it was gold as I ran into the kitchen, hoping, praying, that my parents would notice. I handed it to my mom. "Look, I got straight A's." She glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Evan." Then she turned back to Ryan, who was babbling about scoring 2 points in his middle school basketball game. I still remember my dad leaning back in his chair, beaming at Ryan. "You're a natural athlete, kid. 2 points. 2 lousy points," and they were acting like he'd made it into the NBA. Meanwhile, my hard work was worth a "that's nice." By high school, I stopped expecting anything. I'd come home after school, drop my backpack in my room, and bury myself in my art or whatever little projects I was working on. It was easier to disappear than to keep trying to be noticed. Ryan, of course, basked in the spotlight. He'd walk around with that smug smile on his face, like he knew he was the favorite, and he wasn't afraid to remind me of it. If I got a new pair of shoes, cheap sneakers I'd saved up for myself, Ryan would laugh and say, "Finally upgrading from the hand-me-downs?" If I tried to talk at dinner, he'd interrupt with some story about his soccer team or his plans to start his own fitness brand. What made it worse was my parents never called him out. If I ever dared to complain, they'd look at me like I was the problem. "Don't be so sensitive, Evan," my mom would say. "Ryan's just joking." But it didn't feel like a joke. One moment in particular cemented it all for me. I was 17, and I'd spent weeks working on an idea for a regional business competition. I'd sketched out designs for handmade crafts, put together a presentation, and perfected my pitch. The day I won first place, I felt like I could finally prove myself to my parents. I rushed home, holding the certificate in my hand. I couldn't stop smiling. Dad, I won first place in the business competition. He looked up from his newspaper, nodded, and said, "That's nice. Did you see Ryan's new fitness logo? Looks so professional." I stood there, staring at him, feeling like the ground had disappeared under my feet. That was the moment I knew nothing would ever change. It didn't matter what I did. I would never be Ryan. After that, I made a decision. I was done waiting for their approval. I couldn't keep living like this, feeling like I didn't matter. I started making plans to leave the moment I graduated high school. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew I couldn't stay. Of course, leaving wasn't going to be easy. My parents had sunk thousands into Ryan's latest business venture, some fitness gear brand that made 0 cents, and they didn't have much left for me. When I told them I wanted to move out and focus on my own small business, my dad waved me off. "Evan, we can't spread ourselves too thin. Ryan's business is the future of this family." That was the final straw. If I wanted a better life, I was going to have to build it myself. No help, no support, just me. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't leave the day after graduation with a grand plan, a perfect blueprint, or even much of a safety net. All I had was a beat-up backpack, my laptop, a few $100 saved from odd jobs, and a determination I didn't know I was capable of. I'd been invisible my whole life, but leaving that house made me feel like I was finally stepping into the light. The day I left, it was raining. Of course, it was raining. My parents didn't even notice I was packing up my things. Ryan had a soccer tournament that weekend, so Karen was too busy ironing his jersey, and Steve was loading the car with lawn chairs and coolers. I remember standing by the front door, my bag slung over my shoulder, watching them scurry around. Ryan came downstairs with his usual smug grin. "Where you headed, Evan? Gonna go write poetry in the park?" I didn't take the bait. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Good luck at your game." My dad barely acknowledged me when I stepped outside. He waved a distracted hand over his shoulder. "See you later, bud." They didn't see me drive off. They didn't see me pull onto the highway and head toward Columbus, where I'd rented a tiny studio apartment. They didn't know that I wasn't coming back. The apartment wasn't much. It was in an old building with water stains on the ceiling and carpets that smelled like stale cigarettes. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space where no one could tell me I didn't matter. I didn't waste time. I set up a makeshift office in the corner of my room. A wobbly desk I bought at a yard sale for $10 and a plastic chair that dug into my back. I didn't care. I was free. I spent every hour I wasn't at my part-time job, bagging groceries at a local market, teaching myself how to run a business. I stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials on marketing, web design, and branding. I read blog posts, forums, anything I could get my hands on. My business idea wasn't groundbreaking. Personalized products, mugs, tote bags, notebooks, stationery, things people wanted but with a personal twist. I designed everything myself, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning hunched over my laptop. I researched niche markets, like book clubs, small weddings, and hobby communities. I wanted my products to feel special, like they were made for the buyer and no one else. The first time I made a sale, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Someone bought a mug I designed for $18. It had a cheesy slogan on it about being a proud cat owner. I stared at the notification for a long time, disbelief written all over my face. Someone out there valued something I'd created. That little sale lit a fire in me. I threw everything I had into scaling up, even when it meant making sacrifices. I skipped meals sometimes, choosing to spend money on supplies instead of food. I walked to work to save on gas. I was exhausted, my body running on cheap instant coffee and hope, but I'd never felt more alive. Meanwhile, back at home, Ryan's business was falling apart. I didn't hear about it directly, of course. My parents weren't exactly calling to give me updates, but I saw clues on social media. Ryan's team, which was just a couple of his friends who were more interested in drinking than working, had stopped posting updates. His logo, the one my parents had paid a professional designer to create, was plastered everywhere, but no one seemed to be buying. When Ryan did post, it was all vague motivational nonsense. Dream big, or hustle hard, with photos of him sitting at a desk, pretending to work. It was laughable. I knew my parents were still funneling money into his failed venture, clinging to the idea that their golden child would turn things around. By the time I turned 19, my business was starting to pick up speed. I had a small but loyal customer base, and I'd managed to save enough to move into a slightly bigger office, a single room in a low-rise building downtown. The wallpaper was peeling, and the floor creaked whenever I took a step, but it was a step up from working out of my studio. Every day, I sat at my desk surrounded by boxes of mugs, tote bags, and planners, hustling harder than I ever thought possible. I handled every order myself: design, printing, packing, shipping. Some nights, I'd collapse into my chair, my hands covered in ink or tape, and stare at the ceiling, wondering if I could keep this up. But I always pushed forward. Then, out of the blue, my parents called. It had been months since I'd spoken to them, months of blissful silence. I was in the middle of packing an order when my phone buzzed. "Hello? Evan," my dad said, his voice overly cheery. "How's life treating you?" I knew right then they wanted something. My parents didn't call unless they needed a favor. I leaned back in my chair and waited for the other shoe to drop. "Well," Steve continued after a pause, "Ryan's got a new business idea. Something really exciting. We're putting together a little family meeting to brainstorm, and we thought you could come home and, lend a hand." There it was. They didn't care how I was doing. They didn't care that I'd been working my ass off to build something out of nothing. All they cared about was Ryan. Why would I do that? I asked calmly, though my blood was boiling. "Because family sticks together, Evan," my dad replied like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Ryan's learned a lot since his last venture didn't pan out, and we all just want to support him. You could really help get him back on his feet." I let out a short laugh. "Why would I help Ryan? You've never once asked me if I needed help with anything." "Evan," my dad sighed, like I was being unreasonable, "we've always been there for you." "No, you haven't," I cut him off. "Don't pretend you have. Ryan's your world, and you know it." I expected him to argue, but there was a long silence. Then he said, "If you don't come back, we'll stop supporting you financially." That made me laugh even harder. "Dad, I haven't needed your money in a long time. I'm doing just fine on my own." Another pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I built my own business while you were busy throwing everything you had at Ryan. And guess what? It's working." I could practically hear the disbelief through the phone. "You're joking." "I'm not," I said bluntly. "I don't need you anymore. I haven't for a while." He hung up on me after that. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and let myself feel it. The weight of years of rejection lifting off my shoulders. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them at all. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. After that phone call, I thought my parents would leave me alone. I figured Steve and Karen would be too stunned to process the fact that I was doing fine, better than fine, without them. But I was wrong. If anything, my revelation stirred something in them, like the idea of me thriving outside of their reach was somehow offensive. For a while, though, the silence was blissful. I threw myself into my business harder than ever. Orders kept flowing in, and I started introducing new product lines. I expanded into custom planners and journals, things people could personalize for themselves or as gifts. Wedding favors, corporate gifts, quirky book club bundles, you name it, I designed it. I spent my days working out of my little office, surrounded by boxes and half-finished mock-ups. I'd upgraded my $10 yard sale desk to something sturdier, though I still sat on the same cheap chair because comfort wasn't a priority. I had a small coffee maker in the corner that never got a break and a corkboard covered with sticky notes for my ideas. My life was chaos, but it was my chaos, and I loved it. As the months went by, my business grew faster than I expected. I'd built a loyal customer base online, and word of mouth started bringing in even bigger orders. A local boutique shop in Cincinnati reached out, asking if I could stock their shelves with a line of exclusive notebooks and tote bags. When I signed that contract, I sat back in my chair and grinned at the ceiling. Me, the invisible son, the forgotten kid, making real deals and earning real money. Meanwhile, Ryan's business continued its slow-motion collapse. I didn't hear much directly from my parents, but sometimes I'd catch wind of things through people back home. Ryan's fitness gear brand had completely tanked. My parents had rented him an office in downtown Ashwood, poured money into branding, and even paid for an expert consultant who, from what I could tell, was just Ryan's buddy with a LinkedIn profile. None of it mattered. One of my high school friends, Nate, sent me a photo he'd snapped on his phone one day. It was of Ryan's office. The windows were dusty, the lights were off, and a hand-scrawled sign reading, "Back soon," had been taped to the door for weeks. "Golden boy isn't looking so golden anymore," Nate texted. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some grim satisfaction seeing it. After years of being cast aside, after all the sacrifices my parents made for Ryan, here I was building something real while their star was burning out. But my parents? They still weren't ready to face reality. About 2 months after that disastrous phone call with my dad, my mom called me. I was elbow-deep in packing orders, the smell of cardboard and ink filling the room, when my phone started buzzing on the desk. I glanced at the caller ID. Mom. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, considering whether to ignore it. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello? Evan. It's Mom." "Oh, it's so good to hear your voice." Her tone was overly sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. I leaned against my desk, already bracing myself. "What do you need, Mom?" She hesitated, and for a second, I could hear the fake smile falter. "It's not about needing anything, sweetheart. Your father and I were just talking, and we realized we haven't heard from you in so long. We're worried." Worried? Now they were worried? I kept my voice even. "I'm fine. Busy with work." "That's good to hear," she said quickly, latching onto the thread of conversation. "Speaking of work, well, your father and I have been thinking a lot about Ryan. He's had such a hard time lately, and we just want to see him get back on track. Here it comes. We were hoping you could talk to him," she continued. "Maybe give him some advice? You've clearly done so well for yourself. Maybe you could help him figure out what he's doing wrong." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that caught her off guard. "You're serious? After everything?" "Evan," she said, her voice edging into that exasperated tone I knew so well, "this isn't about the past. It's about family. Ryan looks up to you." "No, he doesn't," I interrupted. "He never has. And you don't care about my success, Mom. You just want me to bail him out because you're running out of ways to prop him up. That's not fair," she said, her voice sharp. "We care about you, Evan. We've always cared about you." For years, I dreamed of hearing her say something like that. But now, it didn't mean anything. "You know what's not fair, Mom?" I said, my voice steady but cold. "Spending your entire life treating one son like a trophy and the other like a burden. And now that Ryan's failing, suddenly you want me to step in and save him?" "No." I heard her take a shaky breath. "We just want to fix this, Evan. We're still a family." I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. "No, Mom. You and Dad only want me around when it's convenient for you. I don't owe you or Ryan anything. Not anymore." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "I don't know why you're being so cold to us." I didn't bother responding. I hung up and tossed the phone onto my desk, breathing hard. For the next few weeks, the calls kept coming. Steve left angry voicemails about how ungrateful I was, accusing me of abandoning the family. Karen sent long, rambling texts about forgiveness and family values. I ignored them all. But then Ryan showed up. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of sorting through inventory when my receptionist, a college intern I'd hired, poked her head into my office. Evan? There's a guy here asking for you. Says he's your brother." My stomach sank, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Send him in." Ryan walked into my office looking like a shadow of the smug kid I used to know. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, and he wore clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in a while. He didn't sit. He just stood there, hands shoved into his pockets. "Evan," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "What do you want?" Ryan. He looked at the floor. I messed up. I know I messed up. Mom and Dad, they're angry. At me. At everything. They keep saying I ruined everything, and I don't know what to do. I raised an eyebrow. And you think I can fix that? He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. I need someone to have my back. I stared at him. All the years of torment, smug remarks, and favoritism flooding back. I remembered the times he laughed at me, the times he rubbed in how much better he was treated. And now here he was, asking for my help. You want me to have your back? I said slowly. Where were you when I needed someone to have mine? Ryan flinched like I'd slapped him. He didn't answer. I shook my head. You made your choices, Ryan. You let Mom and Dad spoil you while they ignored me. Now you're dealing with the consequences. That's not my problem. He stood there for a moment, silent. Then he turned and walked out the door without another word. As the door clicked shut, I let out a long breath. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the forgotten kid hiding in the shadows. I was in control now. A week after Ryan's surprise visit, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally get the message. I'd made it clear I wasn't their backup plan, their fixer, or their safety net. I was done being treated like the invisible son who suddenly became useful when their golden child fell apart. But, of course, they couldn't let it go. It started small. Random calls I ignored. My dad leaving vague voicemails about family emergencies and coming together in tough times. Karen texting me things like, Evan, please call us. We need you. I deleted the messages without reading them all the way through. Then it escalated. One afternoon, I was deep in work, going through designs for a big wedding favor order, when the door to my office flew open. I looked up, startled, as my receptionist, Tina, stumbled in, her face pale. Evan, there's a woman here. She says she's your mom. She wouldn't take no for an answer. I froze. She's here. Before Tina could answer, Karen Carter pushed her way in. My mother. In my office. Standing there like she had every right to be there, holding her purse in front of her like a shield. Evan, she said breathlessly, as if her life depended on getting through the door. We need to talk. I sighed and leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my voice. You can't just show up here, Mom. This is my workplace. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting to the shelves lined with boxes, stacks of inventory, and my computer with open design files. Her expression flickered between surprise and discomfort, like she couldn't believe I'd built something real. This is nice, she said weakly. I ignored the attempt at small talk. What are you doing here? Karen exhaled shakily and stepped closer. Evan, we can't keep ignoring this. Your father and we're in trouble. Things have gotten bad. Really bad. I didn't say anything. I just waited, arms crossed, as she squirmed under my silence. Ryan's business failed, she admitted finally, like it was some big revelation. We invested everything we had. We thought he'd turn things around. But it didn't work. The house is gone. That caught me off guard. Gone? Her eyes were wet now, her voice trembling. We couldn't keep up with the mortgage after everything we put into Ryan. We had to sell it. We're living in a small apartment now, barely enough space to move. I should have felt something. Sadness, sympathy, anger. But all I felt was numb. I thought back to the house I grew up in, where Ryan had been treated like a prince while I was ignored like a piece of old furniture. Now it was gone, just like their illusions of Ryan's greatness. So that's why you're here, I said flatly. You want my help? Her face crumpled. We don't have anyone else to turn to. Your father's lawsuit. He's being sued by one of his old clients for breach of contract. It's more than we can handle. And Ryan? I asked. What's he doing to help? Karen hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Ryan left. I blinked. He what? He moved 2 states over, she said quietly. He's staying with a friend. He won't answer our calls. That hit me harder than I expected. All those years of being propped up, spoiled, and praised. And Ryan abandoned them the moment things got hard. Meanwhile, they'd spent my entire life acting like I wasn't worth their time. And now they wanted me to clean up the mess he left behind. Let me get this straight, I said, leaning forward. You spent years bending over backward for Ryan. You gave him everything, your time, your money, your love. And now that he's bailed on you, you're coming to me because you have no one else left. Karen flinched, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe shame. It's not like that, Evan. Then what is it? I shot back, my voice rising. Because that's exactly what it looks like. She took a shaky step toward my desk. We made mistakes, Evan. I know we did. We were so focused on helping Ryan succeed that we lost sight of everything else. Of you. I know we hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But please, we're asking you for help. Just this once. I looked at her, standing there in my office, begging for scraps of mercy like I hadn't been doing the same thing my entire childhood. I should have felt victorious, seeing her there, so broken and desperate. But all I felt was tired. What kind of help do you want? I asked carefully. Her shoulders sagged with relief. We just need enough to get back on our feet. Help us figure out our finances, pay down some of the bills. Give us a chance to start over. I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? I worked for everything I have. Every single dollar. I sacrificed sleep, food, time. While you were busy throwing money at Ryan's ridiculous dreams. And now you're asking me to save you? Tears ran down her face, but I couldn't stop. Do you even realize what you did to me? All those years I spent begging for a shred of your attention, your approval. Watching you treat Ryan like he was a king while I got whatever scraps you had left. And now you're here because you don't have a choice. She sniffled, trying to steady herself. We want to fix things, Evan. We can't change the past, but we can start over. As a family. Family. I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. You don't get to say that. You didn't care about me when it mattered. You only care now because you're out of options. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I stared at her for a long time, my chest tight, my fists clenched under the desk. A part of me wanted to throw her out of my office and slam the door behind her. Another part of me, some quiet, stubborn part, felt the weight of her words, the years of neglect, the hollow ache of wanting something I'd never get. Finally, I exhaled. I'm not giving you money, Mom. I won't bail you out, but I'll think about something. I don't know what yet. Her eyes lit up, like even that small crack in the door was enough to give her hope. Thank you, Evan. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said sharply. You haven't earned it. She left soon after, leaving the faint smell of her floral perfume lingering in the room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. For years, I'd been invisible to them. Now they were looking at me not as a son, but as a last-ditch lifeline. I didn't know what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to walk away and let them deal with the consequences of their choices. Another part of me, the one I'd spent years burying, still felt tied to them, no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise. One thing was clear, though. Whatever I chose to do next, it would be on my terms. I thought my mother's unannounced visit was the peak of the drama. I should have known better. When my family falls, they don't just stumble. They drag everyone down with them. It wasn't long before my dad decided to take his own shot at wearing me down. A few days after my mother stormed into my office, I got another call. This time, the number on my phone was unfamiliar, but I answered out of habit. Evan, the voice growled. It's your father. I rolled my eyes. He didn't even bother with a hello. Straight to business. What do you want, Dad? I asked, bracing for whatever nonsense was about to hit me. There was no warmth in his voice, just the sharp edge of frustration. We need to talk. Face to face. Your mother said you refused to help her. That's because I did refuse, I replied, leaning back in my chair. I'm not going to bail you out. I already told her that. He scoffed like I'd insulted him. You'd let your own family fall apart? After everything we've done for you? I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. Everything you've done for me? Like ignoring me for 20 years? Like pouring every dime you had into Ryan while I worked for everything I own? Tell me, Dad, what exactly have you done for me? That's not the point, he snapped. We're your parents, Evan. We raised you. We deserve your respect, if nothing else. My patience snapped. You don't get to demand respect. Respect is earned. And you both lost mine a long time ago. There was a long pause on the line, the kind of silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, he sighed, his voice lower this time. We're out of options, Evan. Your mother is barely holding it together. We've lost everything. The house, the business connections. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have nothing after working your whole life? Maybe you should have thought about that before you handed Ryan everything on a silver platter. I shot back. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. For once, my dad didn't have a snappy comeback. Instead, his voice softened, something I hadn't heard in years. We were wrong. About Ryan. About everything. But we don't know how to fix it without you, Evan. You're the only one doing well. You're the only one who made something of yourself. The words should have meant something, but they felt hollow. I'd spent years waiting for them to notice me, to say you matter, Evan. But now that they were saying it, it was too late. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. I'm sorry you're struggling, I said finally, but I'm not your safety net. I hung up before he could reply. My hand shook as I set the phone down on my desk, and I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the next few days, I felt like I was walking around with a storm cloud above my head. I couldn't focus. Every time I tried to work, my parents' voices echoed in my mind. My mother's pleading tone, my father's frustration. I kept replaying every moment of my childhood. The missed birthdays, the shrugged-off accomplishments, the endless praise for Ryan. The guilt tried to creep in, and I hated it. Part of me still wanted to help them, as ridiculous as that sounded. Not because they deserved it, but because I wasn't like them. I wasn't cruel or dismissive. No matter how much I told myself I didn't care anymore, the truth was, I did. Then, Ryan showed up again. It was late in the afternoon, and I was just locking up for the day when I saw him leaning against the wall outside my office building. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His hair unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and his face pale. Ryan, I said flatly, pulling the keys from the lock. What are you doing here? He straightened up, shoving his hands into his pockets. I need to talk to you. We've already talked. Please, Evan, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Just 5 minutes. I sighed and crossed my arms, staying where I was. Fine.
Talk.
He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Mom and Dad are losing it. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I thought I could make something work. I wanted to make them proud. I snorted. Congratulations. You failed. Just like they failed me. He flinched, but I didn't let up. You had everything handed to you, Ryan. Everything. And you blew it. Meanwhile, I had to claw my way out of the hole you and Mom and Dad dug for me. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't mean for it to happen. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I know I was a jerk to you. I don't know why I acted like that. I guess I liked being the favorite. I didn't realize how much it hurt you until now. I studied him for a moment. For once, Ryan wasn't smug or arrogant. He looked small, weak, human. Too little, too late, I said finally. I don't need your apology, Ryan. I moved on. He nodded, swallowing hard. I get it. I just thought you should know that I really am sorry. I didn't say anything. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about Ryan's words, about my father's bitter admission that I was the only one who'd made something of myself. I should have felt triumphant. For years, I dreamed of this moment, the day they'd see me for what I was worth. But instead, I felt empty. All the years of neglect and dismissal had left scars too deep to fix. A week later, I got a call from my Aunt Mary, the only extended family member I still talked to. Evan, she said cautiously, I don't know if you've heard, but your parents are in real trouble. The lawsuit's getting worse, and they might lose everything. I figured, I said, trying not to sound too indifferent. She hesitated. I know they treated you badly. I know you don't owe them anything. But they're your parents, Evan. Are you really just going to let them hit rock bottom? I stayed quiet for a moment, my jaw tight. I don't know, Aunt Mary. She sighed. Just think about it. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But sometimes being the bigger person is about doing what feels right, not what they deserve. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time. I thought about everything. The years of being overlooked, the endless praise Ryan got, the sacrifices I made to get where I was now. My parents had done this to themselves. They made their choices, and they were paying for them. But Aunt Mary's words stuck with me. Being the bigger person doesn't mean they deserve it. It means I deserve to let go of this weight. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but for the first time, I realized that whatever I chose, it wasn't about them. It was about me, and I was finally the one in control.